The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Highgrove House as Charles walked through the empty corridors. It had been 3 months since Diana's funeral, and the silence in his country home felt heavier than ever. The staff moved quietly, speaking in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb the grief that hung in the air like morning fog. Charles found himself avoiding certain rooms entirely. The blue sitting room where Diana used to curl up with her books, the garden room where she would arrange flowers from the greenhouse, even the kitchen, where she would sometimes sneak down late at night for a cup of tea and a chat with the cook. These spaces held too many memories, too many echoes of laughter that would never return. On this particular evening, Charles decided to tackle something he had been putting off for weeks. Diana's personal belongings were still scattered throughout the house, and he knew he needed to sort through them, not for any practical reason, but because keeping everything exactly as she left it was making it impossible for him to move forward. He started in her old study, a small room overlooking the rose garden that Diana had claimed as her own. The desk was still cluttered with her things, charity letters she had been working on, photos of William and Harry from their last summer holiday, a half-finished crossword puzzle with her handwriting in blue ink. Charles picked up each item carefully, as if they were made of glass. Some things he set aside to give to the boys when they were older. Others he placed in boxes marked for charity, knowing Diana would have wanted her clothes and books to help someone else. As he worked, memories flooded back. He remembered how Diana would sit at this very desk, writing thank you notes to hospital staff after her visits. She always insisted on handwriting every single one, saying it meant more than a typed letter. Her dedication to her charitable work had been genuine, even when their marriage was falling apart. It was while clearing out the bottom drawer that Charles found it. Hidden beneath a stack of old Christmas cards was a small, leather-bound book. He recognized it immediately as one of the diaries Diana had always kept. She had been writing in journals since she was a teenager, something she said helped her make sense of her thoughts and feelings. Charles held the diary in his hands for a long moment, unsure what to do. Part of him felt it would be wrong to read something so private. Diana had never shared her diary entries with him, not even during their courtship when they were madly in love. It was her sacred space, her place to be completely honest about her feelings. But another part of him was desperately curious. Their marriage had been complicated, filled with misunderstandings and hurt feelings on both sides. Maybe reading her private thoughts would help him understand what had gone wrong. Maybe it would give him the closure he so desperately needed. Tanter diary was dated from early in their marriage, about 2 years after their wedding. Charles remembered that time as being both wonderful and difficult. They were still learning how to be husband and wife while living under the constant scrutiny of the press and the expectations of the royal family. Charles sat down in Diana's chair and opened to the first page. Her familiar handwriting filled the cream-colored paper, the words flowing in the elegant script she had learned at finishing school. As he began to read, he could almost hear her voice speaking the words aloud. The first few entries were mundane. Diana wrote about her daily activities, her concerns about learning royal protocol, her excitement about upcoming engagements. She mentioned feeling overwhelmed by all the rules and expectations, but also expressed gratitude for the opportunities she had to help people through her royal duties. But as Charles continued reading, the tone of the entries began to change. Diana wrote about feeling lonely in their vast homes, about how difficult it was to connect with Charles when they were both so busy with their separate schedules. She described lying awake at night, wondering if she was cut out for royal life. Charles felt a pang of guilt as he read these passages. He remembered those early days, how focused he had been on teaching Diana about her duties and responsibilities. He had thought he was helping her adjust, but now he realized he might have been overwhelming her instead. She had been so young, barely 20 when they married, and he had been 32 with years of royal training behind him. The entries revealed Diana's growing struggles with confidence and self-doubt. She wrote about comparing herself to other royal women, feeling like she could never measure up. She described moments of panic before public appearances, worrying that she would say or do the wrong thing, and embarrass the family. Reading these intimate thoughts, Charles began to understand his late wife in a way he never had during their marriage. Diana had always seemed so confident in public, charming crowds and handling difficult situations with grace. But privately, she had been battling fears and insecurities that she had never shared with him. As the rain continued to fall outside, Charles found himself completely absorbed in Diana's words. Each entry was like a window into her heart, revealing the complex emotions she had hidden behind her public smile. For the first time since her death, Charles felt like he was truly getting to know the woman he had married, loved, and lost. The clock in Diana's study chimed midnight, but Charles barely noticed. He had been reading for hours, completely lost in his late wife's private thoughts. The diary entries had moved beyond her early struggles with royal life into something much more personal and heartbreaking. Diana had written extensively about their relationship, and Charles found himself reliving their marriage through her eyes. She described their early romantic moments with such tenderness that Charles felt his chest tighten with emotion. She wrote about their honeymoon, their first Christmas together, the joy of discovering she was pregnant with William. But she also wrote about the growing distance between them. Diana described feeling like Charles was slipping away from her, becoming more formal and distant as the pressures of royal life took over. She wrote about lying in bed next to him, feeling like there was an ocean between them even though they were only inches apart. One entry particularly struck Charles. Diana had written about a dinner party at Sandringham, where she had tried to share a funny story about her charity work. Charles, stressed about other matters, had barely listened, and had changed the subject to discuss agricultural policies with another guest. Diana wrote that she felt invisible, like her thoughts and experiences didn't matter to the man she loved most in the world. Charles remembered that dinner, though not the specific moment Diana described. He could see now how his behavior might have hurt her, even though that had never been his intention. He had been raised to believe that duty came first, personal feelings second. It had never occurred to him that Diana might interpret his focus on royal obligations as a rejection of her. As he continued reading, Charles discovered that Diana had been far more aware of the rumors and speculation about their marriage than he had realized. She wrote about reading newspaper articles that dissected every public appearance, looking for signs of trouble in their relationship. She described the pain of seeing herself portrayed as difficult or demanding, when she was simply trying to find her place in an unfamiliar world. The diary revealed Diana's deep love for their sons and her concerns about raising them in the public eye. She wrote beautifully about William's first steps, Harry's infectious laugh, and her determination to give them as normal a childhood as possible. She also expressed fears about how their marital problems might affect the boys, worrying that they were already sensing the tension between their parents. Charles found himself crying as he read Diana's account of the day she realized their marriage was in serious trouble. She had planned a romantic evening to celebrate their wedding anniversary, but Charles had to cancel at the last minute for an important meeting. Diana wrote about sitting alone at the beautifully set table, feeling like she was losing the battle for her husband's attention and affection. What broke Charles's heart most was reading about Diana's attempts to save their marriage. She wrote about trying different approaches to connect with him, suggesting activities they could do together, asking about his interests and work. She described feeling like she was constantly walking on eggshells, never sure if she was saying the right thing or making matters worse. The entries revealed that Diana had been aware of Camilla's presence in Charles's life much earlier than he had thought. She wrote about the phone calls that would make Charles withdraw, the mysterious letters, the feeling that she was competing with a ghost from his past. But rather than anger, her words expressed mostly sadness and confusion. She couldn't understand why Charles had married her if he was still in love with someone else. Charles set the diary down for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight of Diana's pain. He had known their marriage was difficult, but he hadn't realized how deeply his actions had wounded her. Reading her private thoughts made him see their relationship from a completely different perspective, and he was ashamed of how blind he had been to her struggles. The diary also revealed Diana's growing involvement with charitable causes as a way to find purpose and meaning in her life. She wrote about visiting hospitals and homeless shelters, about the people she met who were facing real hardships. These experiences gave her a sense of worth and accomplishment that she wasn't finding in her royal duties or her marriage. Diana described one particular visit to a children's hospital that had changed her perspective on life. She wrote about holding a young boy who was dying of cancer, and how his courage and optimism in the face of such adversity had humbled her. From that day forward, she was determined to use her position to help people who were suffering, regardless of what others thought about her methods. As Charles read these passages, he began to understand the woman Diana had become in her final years. Her compassion and dedication to helping others hadn't been a publicity stunt or a way to gain popularity. It had grown from genuine pain and a desire to transform her own suffering into something meaningful for others. The rain had stopped, and pale morning light was beginning to filter through the windows. Charles realized he had been reading all night, so absorbed in Diana's words that time had seemed to stand still. He closed the diary and sat back in her chair, feeling emotionally drained but somehow closer to understanding the woman he had married and lost. Charles made himself a cup of tea and returned to Diana's study as the sun rose over the Gloucestershire countryside. He knew he should rest, but he was compelled to continue reading. The diary had become a bridge to Diana, a way to have the honest conversations they had never managed to have while she was alive. The next section of entries covered a particularly difficult period in their marriage, when the press speculation about their relationship had reached fever pitch. Diana wrote about the constant photographer presence outside their homes, the telephoto lenses pointed at their windows, the feeling that they were living in a fishbowl with no privacy or peace. She described the stress of never being able to relax, even in their own home. Every argument, every moment of tension between them seemed to be somehow captured and reported in the newspapers the next day. Diana wrote about suspecting that someone close to them was leaking information to the press, though she never named who she thought it might be. The diary revealed how this constant scrutiny had made their problems worse. Diana wrote about feeling like she and Charles were performing even when they were alone together, both of them aware that any sign of discord would be front-page news within hours. The natural process of working through marital difficulties became impossible when every step was being watched and judged by millions of people. Charles was surprised to read about Diana's early attempts to reach out to Camilla directly. She had written about a lunch meeting where she had hoped to clear the air and understand what role Camilla was playing in their marriage. Diana described the encounter as polite but painful, with Camilla making it clear that she had no intention of stepping aside. What struck Charles most was Diana's honesty about her own mistakes during this period. She wrote about her growing friendship with James Hewitt, acknowledging that she had been seeking the emotional connection she wasn't finding. At home, she didn't justify her actions, but she explained the loneliness and desperation that had led her to make choices she later regretted. Diana also wrote extensively about her struggles with bulimia, something Charles had known about but never fully understood. The diary entries revealed the depth of her illness and how it had been triggered by the pressures of royal life and the breakdown of their marriage. She described the shame and secrecy surrounding her eating disorder and how it had become both a symptom of her pain and a way to maintain some control in a life that felt completely out of control. Reading these entries, Charles realized how much Diana had been suffering while trying to maintain her public duties and care for their children. She wrote about forcing herself to smile and appear confident at public events while battling severe anxiety and depression. The strength it must have taken to carry on during this period was something Charles had never fully appreciated. The diary also revealed Diana's deep concern for William and Harry during this troubled time. She wrote about trying to shield them from the worst of the media attention and the tension at home. She described bedtime conversations with the boys, answering their innocent questions about why Mummy and Daddy seemed sad, trying to reassure them that they were loved despite the chaos surrounding their family. Diana had documented several family holidays during this period, and Charles could see through her words how hard she had worked to create happy memories for their sons. She wrote about building sandcastles with Harry, teaching William to ride his bike and organizing treasure hunts at Balmoral. Even while her own world was falling apart, She was determined to give her children the loving, stable childhood she felt she had missed. One particularly poignant entry described Diana's feelings after the famous Panorama interview. She wrote about the decision to speak publicly about their marriage, acknowledging that it would change everything, but feeling that she had no other choice. She had felt silenced for too long, unable to tell her side of the story while others controlled the narrative about her life. Diana wrote about the aftermath of the interview, the formal conversations about divorce, and the painful process of dividing their lives. But she also expressed hope for the future, writing about her plans to focus on her charitable work and create a new life as a single mother. She was determined to prove that she could be more than just a royal wife who hadn't worked out. Charles found himself admiring Diana's resilience as he read these later entries. Despite everything she had endured, she had maintained her optimism and her commitment to making a positive difference in the world. She wrote about her work with landmine victims, her AIDS activism, and her efforts to bring attention to homelessness and mental health issues. The diary revealed that Diana had been planning several major charitable initiatives for the months following her death. She had wanted to establish a foundation focused on helping disadvantaged children around the world. She had been in discussions with international aid organizations about expanding her humanitarian work. Reading about these unrealized dreams made Charles feel the full weight of what the world had lost when Diana died. As Charles neared the end of the diary, he found entries about her growing relationship with Dodi Fayed. Diana wrote about feeling happy and hopeful for the first time in years. She described Dodi as kind and attentive, someone who made her laugh and helped her remember what it felt like to be cherished. She wrote about tentative plans for the future, while acknowledging that she needed to be careful about moving too quickly into another serious relationship. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before Diana's death. She had written about her hopes for the coming year, her excitement about William starting at Eton, her plans to take Harry on a special holiday to Africa. She mentioned feeling more confident and settled than she had in a long time, finally able to see a clear path forward for her life. Charles closed the diary and sat in stunned silence as the morning sun filled Diana's study with golden light. The final entry, written with such hope and optimism, made her sudden death even more tragic. She had finally found peace and direction in her life, only to have it cut short just as she was beginning to truly flourish. But it wasn't just the timing of Diana's death that shook Charles as he reflected on what he had read. It was the realization of how completely he had misunderstood his wife during their marriage. All those years, he had seen her struggles as dramatic outbursts or attention-seeking behavior, never recognizing the genuine pain and confusion behind them. The diary had revealed a woman who had tried desperately to make their marriage work, who had loved him deeply despite his emotional unavailability, and who had found the strength to rebuild her life when that love wasn't enough to save their relationship. Diana had been far more self-aware and insightful than Charles had ever given her credit for. As he sat surrounded by Diana's belongings, Charles began to understand the true cost of his choices during their marriage. His inability to let go of his past with Camilla hadn't just hurt Diana. It had destroyed any chance they might have had to build a genuine partnership together. He had been so focused on what he thought he needed that he had been blind to what Diana was offering him. The diary had also shown Charles how much Diana had grown during their years apart. Free from the constraints of trying to be the perfect royal wife, she had discovered her own voice and her own mission in life. Her work with AIDS patients, landmine victims, and homeless people hadn't been about generating positive publicity. It had been about finding meaning and purpose in her own experiences of pain and isolation. Charles found himself wondering what might have happened if he had read these diary entries while Diana was still alive. Would it have made a difference? Could they have found a way to understand each other better, to co-parent their sons more effectively, perhaps even to become friends after their divorce? The questions haunted him because he would never know the answers. Standing up from Diana's desk, Charles walked to the window overlooking the rose garden. Diana had spent countless hours out there, working alongside the gardeners, getting her hands dirty in the soil. She had always said that gardening helped her think, that there was something healing about nurturing growth and beauty. Now Charles understood why she had needed that peaceful refuge. The diary had revealed so many things about Diana that Charles wished he had known while she was alive. Her love for classical music, inspired by her childhood piano lessons. Her secret dream of writing children's books someday. Her complicated relationship with her own mother and stepmother. Her fears about aging in the public eye. Her pride in learning to be financially independent after their divorce. But perhaps most surprising was learning about Diana's genuine affection for the royal family, despite all the difficulties she had experienced. She wrote about her fondness for the Queen Mother, her respect for Princess Anne's work ethic, and her gratitude for the way the Queen had tried to support her during the worst times in her marriage. Diana had never wanted to destroy the institution she had married into. She had simply wanted to find her place within it. Charles thought about his sons, now teenagers dealing with their own grief and confusion about their mother's death. William and Harry had loved Diana fiercely, and they were struggling to understand why she had been taken from them so suddenly. Charles realized that the diary might help them understand their mother better someday, though he would need to think carefully about whether and when to share any of its contents with them. The entries had also given Charles insights into Diana's relationship with her sons that he had never fully grasped. She had been determined to raise them with an awareness of the world beyond palace walls, taking them to homeless shelters and hospitals to show them how most people lived. She had wanted William and Harry to understand that their privilege came with responsibilities to help others. Diana had written extensively about her hopes for her sons' futures. She wanted William to feel ready for the responsibilities of kingship, but not trapped by them. She hoped Harry would find his own path to make a meaningful contribution to society. Most of all, she wanted both boys to experience real love and happiness in their personal lives, something she felt she had never fully achieved in her marriage to Charles. As Charles prepared to leave Diana's study, he felt a profound sense of loss that went beyond his grief over her death. He mourned the conversations they had never had, the understanding they had never reached, the friendship they might have developed if they had been able to move past their hurt and disappointment with each other. But he also felt a strange sense of gratitude. The diary had given him something precious, a final gift from Diana that helped him see their relationship with new eyes. It didn't erase the mistakes he had made or the pain they had caused each other, but it did provide a kind of closure he hadn't expected to find. Charles carefully placed the diary back in the drawer where Diana had hidden it, but he knew he would never forget what he had learned from reading it. Her words had changed his understanding of their marriage, their divorce, and her death. More importantly, they had given him a deeper appreciation for the remarkable woman Diana had been beneath all the public drama and media speculation. In the weeks following his discovery of Diana's diary, Charles found himself changed in ways he hadn't expected. The intimate glimpse into his late wife's thoughts and feelings had awakened emotions he had buried for years. He began to question many of the choices he had made during their marriage and in the years since her death. Charles started having vivid dreams about Diana, not the painful nightmares that had plagued him immediately after her death, but gentle conversations where they talked honestly about their relationship for the first time. In these dreams, Diana would smile sadly and tell him that she understood why things had happened the way they did, but she wished they could have found a better way to handle their problems while she was alive. The diary had revealed so many moments when Diana had reached out to him, trying to bridge the growing gap between them that Charles had either missed entirely or misinterpreted at the time. He remembered an evening early in their marriage when Diana had suggested they take a weekend trip together, just the two of them, without any official duties or staff. Charles had dismissed the idea as impractical, not realizing that Diana was desperately trying to reconnect with the man she had fallen in love with. Reading about Diana's struggles with royal protocol had also opened Charles's eyes to how overwhelming the transition must have been for her. He had grown up in the system, learning its rules and expectations gradually over decades. Diana had been thrown into the deep end at 19, expected to master complex etiquette and traditions, while dealing with intense media scrutiny and the pressures of a failing marriage. Charles began to see his own behavior during their marriage with painful clarity. His retreat into formality whenever their relationship became difficult hadn't been dignified or appropriate, as he had told himself at the time. It had been cowardly, Instead of fighting for their marriage or working through their problems together, he had withdrawn into duty and protocol, leaving Diana to struggle alone with her confusion and pain. The diary entries about Diana's charitable work had particularly affected Charles. He had always respected her dedication to helping others, but he hadn't understood how deeply personal that work had been for her. Diana hadn't just been making appearances or generating good publicity for the royal family. She had been transforming her own pain into compassion for others who were suffering. Charles remembered several occasions when he had suggested that Diana's approach to charity work was too emotional or personal. He had worried that her hands-on style and willingness to break protocol might reflect poorly on the institution. Now he realized that her instinctive empathy and genuine care for people had been exactly what the monarchy needed to remain relevant in a changing world. The revelation of how aware Diana had been of the media speculation about their marriage had also troubled Charles deeply. She had been reading every article, absorbing every criticism and rumor, while he had largely ignored the press coverage. He had told himself that the media attention was just part of royal life, something to be endured rather than engaged with. But Diana had been fighting a daily battle against negative portrayals and invasive speculation, often without any support from him. Charles found himself re-examining his relationship with Camilla in light of what he had learned from the diary. Diana had known about their connection much earlier than he had realized, and her pain over feeling like she was competing with someone from his past had been genuine and deep. While Charles had told himself that his friendship with Camilla was harmless, the diary made it clear that Diana had experienced it as a betrayal of their marriage vows. The entries about William and Harry had been particularly moving for Charles to read. Diana's love for their sons had been fierce and unconditional, but she had also worried constantly about how their marital problems were affecting the boys. She had written about trying to create stability and happiness for them, while her own world was falling apart. And Charles was struck by her strength and selflessness during such a difficult time. Charles began spending more time with William and Harry, trying to be more emotionally available to them as they processed their grief. He found himself sharing memories of their mother that he had never talked about before, telling them about Diana's kindness, her sense of humor, and her dedication to helping others. The boys seemed grateful for these conversations, hungry for any insights into their mother's inner life. One evening, William asked his father if he missed their mother. Charles found himself giving a more honest answer than he had ever given before. He told William that he missed the woman Diana had been becoming in her final years, the confident, purposeful person she had grown into after their divorce. He admitted that he regretted not knowing that version of Diana better while she was alive. The diary had also made Charles reflect on his own capacity for change and growth. Diana had evolved so much during their years apart, discovering new strengths and finding her own voice in the world. Charles wondered if he had remained too rigid, too set in his ways, too focused on maintaining traditions rather than adapting to new circumstances. As autumn turned to winter, Charles found himself visiting Diana's grave more frequently. He would stand quietly at the small island in the lake at Althorpe, Diana's family estate, and have the conversations with her that he wished they had been able to have while she was alive. He would tell her about the things he had learned from reading her diary, apologize for the ways he had hurt her, and thank her for the insights she had given him into their shared past. These visits brought Charles a sense of peace he hadn't expected to find. The diary had given him a way to understand Diana's perspective on their relationship, and while it couldn't undo the mistakes of the past, it had helped him make sense of what had gone wrong between them. For the first time since her death, Charles felt like he was truly honoring Diana's memory instead of just mourning what might have been. 2 years had passed since Charles discovered Diana's diary, and the impact of reading her private thoughts continued to shape his life in profound ways. The man who had once struggled to express emotions publicly had become more open and authentic. In his interactions with both his family and the public, Charles had made significant changes to his approach to royal duties, incorporating many of the lessons he had learned from Diana's example. He began visiting hospitals and homeless shelters in the same hands-on way that Diana had, taking time to really connect with the people he met, rather than simply making ceremonial appearances. Staff members noticed that he seemed more relaxed, and genuine during these engagements, less concerned with protocol and more focused on making meaningful connections. The diary had also influenced Charles's relationship with the media. Understanding how much the constant scrutiny had hurt Diana made him more protective of his son's privacy and more thoughtful about how the royal family engaged with the press. He began to see media relations as a balance between public duty and personal dignity, rather than something to be simply endured or ignored. William and Harry had both grown into young men who embodied many of their mother's best qualities. William showed Diana's natural empathy and diplomatic skills, while Harry inherited her rebellious spirit and passion for helping disadvantaged people. Charles could see Diana's influence in both boys, and he made sure to acknowledge and celebrate those qualities, rather than trying to mold them into traditional royal stereotypes. On the 5th anniversary of Diana's death, Charles made a decision that surprised many people. He established a charitable foundation in Diana's name, focused on the causes that had been closest to her heart. The Diana Foundation would support work with AIDS patients, homeless individuals, and victims of landmines, continuing the humanitarian mission that Diana had begun during her lifetime. At the foundation's launch event, Charles gave a speech that many observers noted was unusually personal and emotional. He spoke about Diana's courage in confronting difficult social issues, her ability to connect with people from all walks of life, and her determination to use her position to make a real difference in the world. He acknowledged that he had not always understood or appreciated these qualities while she was alive, but he was committed to honoring her legacy now. The speech marked a turning point in how Charles was perceived by the public. People began to see him as more human and relatable, someone who had learned from his mistakes and was working to become a better person. The stiff, formal prince they had known was evolving into someone warmer and more accessible. Charles also began writing in a journal himself, inspired by Diana's example. He found that putting his thoughts and feelings on paper helped him process his emotions and reflect on his experiences in a more thoughtful way. Writing became a form of meditation for him, a way to step back from the demands of royal life and examine his own growth and development. In his journal entries, Charles often wrote to Diana directly, telling her about their son's achievements, sharing his thoughts about current events, and updating her on the charitable work being done in her name. These one-sided conversations gave him comfort and helped him feel connected to her memory in a positive way. The diary had also changed Charles's perspective on his role as future king. Diana's writings about wanting the monarchy to be more accessible and relevant to ordinary people had made him think carefully about what kind of monarch he wanted to be. He began to envision a more streamlined, modern royal family that focused on service and connection rather than ceremony and distance. Charles started having regular private meetings with representatives from various charitable organizations, listening to their needs and concerns without the usual formality of official royal visits. These conversations gave him insights into social issues that he might never have encountered otherwise, broadening his understanding of the challenges facing contemporary society. One of the most significant changes in Charles's life was his evolving relationship with Camilla. Reading Diana's diary had made him confront the pain that his past relationship with Camilla had caused, and he was determined to handle any future relationship more thoughtfully and transparently. When he and Camilla eventually married, they did so with careful consideration for public opinion and his son's feelings. As Charles entered his 60s, he often reflected on the lessons he had learned from Diana's diary. The experience had taught him that understanding someone's perspective doesn't require agreement, but it does require empathy and genuine effort to see beyond your own assumptions and prejudices. The diary had given Charles something invaluable that he had missed during his marriage to Diana: true insight into who she had been as a person. It had shown him a woman of remarkable strength and resilience, someone who had faced tremendous challenges with grace and determination. Most importantly, it had helped him understand that their failed marriage had been the result of two well-meaning people who simply couldn't find a way to bridge their differences, while they were both still learning how to be themselves. On quiet evenings at Highgrove, Charles would sometimes sit in Diana's old study and remember the night he had first opened her diary. The discovery had been painful, but it had also been transformative. It had changed him from a man haunted by regret into someone committed to learning from the past and creating a better future. The diary remained in its hiding place in Diana's desk drawer, but its impact on Charles's life continued to grow with each passing year. Diana's words had given him the gift of understanding, forgiveness, and ultimately, a path toward becoming the kind of person she had always believed he could be. In reading her most private thoughts, Charles had finally learned to hear the voice of the remarkable woman he had married, loved, and lost.